Well, good evening, everybody. First of all, a quick heads up. Saturday morning, Australia time. That'll be late evening time for UK, which will be mid to early afternoon across the pond. Hoping to do a live video chat with a great supporter from Melbourne, Tracy Keogh, who is a bit of an expert in some of the legal matters. So looking forward to having a chat with, with Tracy. Don't worry, somebody else will get the phone for me eventually. I'd like to thank, believe it or not, this might seem a bit odd, I'd like to thank Ken Kratz, who goes under the name of Charles Darwin, for alerting me way back when I did my first couple of videos about William Duffin's decision, about this article by Drizin and Leo, which I'm going to read all of the the article, and I want to discuss some of it with Tracy on Friday night, along with one or two other aspects to do with, obviously, Brendan's case. So let's just jump straight in. I'll leave the link below so you can read it at your leisure. Interestingly, this document is dated 3/1/2005, exactly 1 year before Brendan's infamous confession. The article is entitled "The Problem of False Confessions in the Post-DNA World." In recent years, numerous individuals who confessed to and were convicted of serious felony crimes have been released from prison, some after many years of incarceration, and declared factually innocent, often as a result of DNA tests that were not possible at the time of arrest, prosecution, and conviction. DNA testing has also exonerated numerous individuals who confessed to serious crimes before their cases went to trial. Numerous others have been released from prison and declared factually innocent in cases that did not involve DNA tests, but instead may have occurred because authorities discovered that the crime never occurred, or that it was physically impossible for the wrongly convicted defendant to have committed the crime, or because the true perpetrator of the crime was identified, apprehended, and convicted. In this article, we analyse 125 recent cases of proven interrogation-induced false confessions, cases in which indisputably innocent individuals confessed to crimes they did not commit, and how these cases were treated by officials in the criminal justice system. This article has three goals. First, we provide and analyse basic demographic, legal and case-specific descriptive data from these 125 cases. This is significant because this is the largest cohort of interrogation-induced false confession cases ever identified and studied in the research literature. Second, we analyse the role that false confession evidence played in these cases and how the defendants in these cases were treated by the criminal justice system. In particular, this article focuses on how criminal justice officials and triers of fact respond to confession evidence, whether it biases their evaluations and overwhelms other evidence, particularly evidence, obviously, of innocence, and how likely false confessions are to lead to the wrongful arrest, prosecution, conviction, and incarceration of the innocent. Analysis of the aforementioned question leads to the conclusion that the problem of interrogation-induced false confession in the American criminal system is far more significant than previously supposed. Furthermore, the problem of interrogation-induced false confessions has profound implications for the study of miscarriages of justice as well as the proper administration of justice. Third and finally, this article suggests that several promising policy reforms, particularly mandatory electronic recording of police interrogations, will minimise the number of false confessions and thereby inject a much-needed dose of justice into the American criminal system. Introduction. In April 1989, a young woman was attacked while jogging in New York City's Central Park. The jogger entered the park near 84th Street shortly after 9 p.m, travelled north along the East Drive and then turned onto the 102nd Street Cross Drive heading west. At approximately 9:15 p.m, she was knocked down and dragged into a ravine where she was raped and sodomized. She was beaten so severely, particularly in the area of her left eye, that she lost nearly 80% of her blood. On the same evening, a large group of teenage boys, with estimates ranging as high as 40 to 50, entered Central Park near East 110th Street in Harlem and began walking south along the park's East Drive. The boys subsequently encountered Antonio Diaz, who was eating dinner and drinking beer in the park that night. Some of the boys proceeded to beat up Diaz and dragged him into a nearby thicket of bushes. This group of boys then continued heading south on East Drive, harassing several cyclists along the way. Sometime thereafter, a police car passed the group, causing them to break up temporarily before regrouping near some ball fields in the park's North Meadow. According to Drizin Robinson, who was one of the boys in the group that night, the group then left the ball fields, went south towards 97th Street, squirmed through a hole in the fence and hid in some bushes in the close proximity to the northern edge of the reservoir. While concealing themselves in the bushes, the boys waited for joggers to pass. Sometime before 9:30, 5 of the boys tried to assault David Lewis as he jogged near the reservoir. As Lewis sped past the boys' hiding place, one of the boys struck him on the elbow with a blunt object. A second jogger, David Good, claimed that he was chased by a group of 10 African American youths who threw stones at him as he ran past them. Robert Garner, a third jogger, was chased and caught by 15 to 20 youths on the reservoir's northern edge. As they assaulted Garner, the mob made demands for his money. When Garner said that he had none, they released him. Finally, a fourth jogger, John Laughlin, a 6'4" ex-Marine, seeing that Garner was in trouble, approached the group. Laughlin was unable to render assistance, however, due to a blow to the head with a blunt object, later thought to be a solid metal pipe, which left him temporarily unconscious. 2 plainclothes officers, Eric Reynolds and Robert Powers, responding to complaints about the mayhem, spotted 15 to 20 boys on Central Park West near 100th Street at around 10:15. As their squad car approached the group, all but 2 of the boys scattered. Stephen Lopez, age 15, and Raymond Santana, age 14, remained at the scene and answered Officer Reynolds' questions, insisting that they were not part of the larger group. Reynolds and a third officer, Evelise Flores, ran after the boys who had fled, eventually catching Kevin Richards and Clarence Thomas, both of whom were 14 years old at the time. When Richardson and Thomas both identified Lopez and Santana as being part of their group, all 4 boys were arrested. A 5th boy, Lamont McCall, age 13, was also among the first arrestees. Shortly before 1 a.m, 2 men, Benicio Moore and Carlos Colon, discovered the body of the female jogger. The men were walking home when, after hearing moaning sounds in the darkness, they went to investigate the source of the noise. Prior to this discovery, the police officers had been focusing only on the Diaz assault, the attempted assaults on the cyclists, and the attacks on the joggers. Because the jogger's body was discovered near the location where Diaz and the cyclists had been accosted, however, the police suspected that the boys involved in those crimes were also responsible for raping and beating the female jogger. Throughout the night and the next day, Manhattan North homicide detectives interrogated the boys already in custody and apprehended others who had been named as accomplices. Anton McRae, age 15, was taken into custody at 11 a.m, and Yusuf Salem, age 15, and Corey Wise, age 16, were both brought in at 10 p.m. on the next day. 2 hours before the arrest of Salam and Wise, prosecutors Elizabeth Lederer and Linda Fairstein arrived at the station to assist the detectives in the interrogations. Leader and Fairstein worked in the sex crimes unit of the District Attorney's Office, and their involvement at this early stage of the investigation indicated that the DA's office also believed the boys to be responsible for the sexual assault. Their arrival also coincided with the next phase of the investigation, videotaping the boys' confessions to the rape of the Central Park jogger. Ultimately, prosecutors were able to obtain 5 confessions to the rape of the Central Park jogger. 4 of these confessions were captured on videotape, and the 5th was an alleged oral confession. A 6th defendant, Steve Lopez, who had been identified as the ringleader by all of the other boys, refused to admit to any participation in the rape. Although the confessions were videotaped and most of the boys confessed in the presence of their parents, the earlier interrogation sessions had not been taped. Precisely what happened during the hours of police interrogations was a matter of great dispute, both in pre-trial motions and at trial. The boys and their parents claimed that the interrogations were highly coercive, alleging that officers slapped the boys, yelled and cursed at them, and called them liars. Several boys claimed that they were told that they were being questioned as mere witnesses and that they would be released from custody if they only confessed. The police officers denied that they used coercive tactics, although one detective did admit that he lied to Yusuf Salam when he told Salam that his fingerprints would be found on the victim's jogging shorts. After hearing both accounts of what transpired during hearings for the defendants, pre-trial motions to suppress their confessions, Judge Thomas Gallagher found that the police detectives were more credible than the defence witnesses and ruled that the defendants' statements were admissible in their trials. 5 of the Central Park defendants took their cases to trial. The first trial defendants were Raymond Santana, Yusuf Salem and Antron McRae. The second involved Corey Wise and Kevin Richardson. All 5 defendants were convicted of participating in the rape of the jogger and the assaults on several of the cyclists and the other joggers. Jurors found Corey Wise, who gave 2 conflicting taped confessions, not guilty of the rape, but guilty of a lesser charge of sex abuse for, quote, playing with the jogger's legs. Only Kevin Richardson, who had hair consistent with the jogger's on his clothing and who was named as one of the boys who beat the jogger with a rock, was found guilty of attempted murder. All the boys who went to trial were sentenced to between 5 and 15 years in prison. Steve Lopez was never brought to trial on the rape, but pled guilty to one of the assaults near the reservoir. In January 2002, a convict named Matthias Reyes contacted authorities and informed them that he, acting alone, had raped the Central Park jogger. Reyes was one of New York City's most notorious serial rapists. Between June 1989 and his apprehension in August of that year, Reyes terrorized the Upper East Side, raping 4 women, one of whom, a pregnant woman, he killed after raping her in front of her children. More significantly, when Reyes' DNA was compared to that recovered from the Central Park jogger crime scene, there was a match. Semen stains on the jogger's socks were proven to have come from Reyes. This newly discovered evidence prompted the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to launch a reinvestigation of the case. In the fall of 2002, attorneys retained by 3 of the boys learned that DNA testing tended to exonerate their clients of the rape and filed a motion to vacate the convictions. Meanwhile, Reyes gave a nationally televised interview in which he provided a detailed description of the assault and rape of the jogger, going so far as to draw a map of the area in which the attack took place. Reyes also claimed in the interview that he did not know any of the boys who were convicted of the rape. After an exhaustive 11-month investigation, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office was unable to establish any link between Reyes and any of the 5 defendants. Additional new evidence emerged much of which tended to undermine the validity of the boys' convictions. At both trials, the prosecutors had stated that hair consistent with the joggers was found on Kevin Richardson's clothing. DNA testing, a technique not scientifically possible at the time of the trials, later demonstrated that the hairs were probably not the joggers. Similarly, hair and blood recovered from a rock found near the crime scene, which prosecutors suggest was the weapon, was found not to have been the joggers. In light of this exculpatory evidence, the District Attorney's Office ultimately decided to join the motion to vacate the boys' convictions. The District Attorney's 58-page memorandum in support of the defence motion outlines why prosecutors chose to believe Reyes's confession that he acted alone and why they gave it greater weight than the boys' videotaped confessions. On December 19th, 2002, Judge Charles Tejeda of the New York Supreme Court granted the motion and vacated all of the convictions of the original Central Park jogger defendants. District Attorney Robert Morgenthau and attorneys in his office deserve credit for reinvestigating the jogger case when compelling evidence of the boys' innocence first came to light. Rather than reinvestigate such claims, police and prosecutors often vigorously defend the conviction, using the fact that a judge or jury must have found the confession to be reliable in order to convict as justification for refusing to reopen the case. Indeed, District Attorney Morgenthau's decision to support the defence motion to vacate the convictions was sharply criticised by former prosecutors from his office, police officers involved in the original investigation, and others connected to the case. In fact, the New York City Police Department conducted its own investigation and released its own report. Although ultimately concurring with the DA's decision to join in the motion to vacate, the NYPD report took issues with many of the DA's factual findings, attacked the credibility of Matias Reyes' statements, and advanced several theories in which both Reyes and the original defendants could have participated in the assaults. The discovery that Matias Reyes' DNA matched the DNA taken from a sock found at the Central Park crime scene triggered the reinvestigation of the Central Park jogger case. This article will examine how DNA testing has changed our understanding of wrongful prosecution and conviction in America, focusing specifically on the phenomena of interrogation-induced false confession. This article will document and analyse more than 125 false confessions, the largest such cohort ever assembled. Unlike previous studies of false confessions, however, the confessions considered in this article have been proven to be false. The Central Park jogger case is representative of many of the trends we have observed in the cohort, including issues of youth, mental disability, multiple false confessions in a single case, and the utility of DNA testing in overcoming resistance to the notion of false confession. In a development that can be traced directly to the increased use of DNA testing, most of the confessions in the cohort have been proven false in the past 5 years. Primarily, as a result of DNA testing, approximately 2/3 of the exonerations have occurred pre-trial rather than post-conviction. In this way, DNA testing has helped to minimise the consequences of false confessions. This article proceeds as follows. Part 1 discusses from a historical perspective the study of wrongful convictions and the prominent role that false confessions have played in such studies. Part 1 also discusses the development of DNA testing and its role in renewing interest in the study of wrongful convictions. Why don't we hold it there and we'll look at what Drizin and, I nearly said Nyrider, Drizin and Leo have to say about part 2. Very interesting that we're looking at, first of all, the first case they come up with is the Central Park 5. Very interesting that. And as I say, the fact that William Duffin used this article by Leo and Drizin in his decision is not surprising when you hear that, yes, it is the largest, a look at the largest number of cases in recent times. There's an interesting figure later on that shows how the number of people exonerated as a result of DNA proving that their confessions were false is actually increasing. Anyway, that's all I've got time for today. Better get out and do some work. No peace for the wicked during the holiday season for some. We'll catch you again soon with part 2 of Drizin and Leo's article. Bye for now.